Hey, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so hello, nice to meet you.
Likewise. And again, apologies.
No, I'm totally fine. So to introduce myself, my name is King Woo Cho, and I'm a student from South Korea, and I'm studying political science and communication in Bar-Ilan University.
How did you find yourself in Bar-Ilan?
Like, how did I get to this university?
Yeah.
Oh, so I came to it. I'm a bit nervous right now. I came to
Don't
Israel.
be nervous. Don't be nervous at all.
Yeah. I came to Israel in 2016 and 2019. And in 2016, I came for a pilgrimage trip. And in 2019, I came again to travel and search for university. Mm-hmm. And I found that Bar-Ilan University has this English program in political science and communication. And mm-hmm. actually there was Bar-Ilan and IDC Herzliya, but right. I thought Bar-Ilan will be more feeling of Israel because Herzliya is known to be like an American school. And that's why I came to Bar-Ilan. And like about Israel is like, I wanted to study abroad, like not just go to university in South Korea, because if I study abroad, I thought I can learn my English more and broaden my small perspective and meet other people. And Israel was a very interesting country for me because there's like, I'm a Christian, so that could be a reason why Israel is very important. And I thought Israel will be how do you say, an important country in the future in the politics area and international field. So
that's great. So how long have you been in? So you've been in Israel. So are you in your third year of Bar-Ilan now?
No, it's actually my first year.
Ah, okay. Mm-hmm. All right. And are you after military service in ROK? Or you still have that in front of you?
I actually, after my first year, I'm postponing my study and going back to South Korea to do my military service.
Oh, and you can't finish your BA first?
No, that was my first plan, but do you know about Katusa?
I've heard of it, but I don't know exactly what it is.
It's the Korean augmentation to the United States Army.
Oh, okay.
So I'm gonna be in that.
Oh yes, position. I do know that. Yeah, mm-hmm. I understand. It's for Korean soldiers who have perfect English.
Not perfect, but like English skills.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm willing to go to.
But they won't let you defer your Army service until you finish your BA.
Yeah, if you get that certain position, you need to go and serve it for it.
Okay. Well, listen. So we'll start this in 2 seconds. I just wanted to tell you, first of all, I'm very happy that we're meeting. Mm-hmm. I started here in November, and I'm very, very interested in a much deeper engagement of our embassy here in Seoul with Korean students who are studying in Israeli academic institutions. I think, for example, some of the materials that you could produce for us in Korean language, both in the field of explaining Israel's position or explaining what it means to study abroad, could be priceless for us. And we have 2 people in the embassy who are responsible for this. One is a fellow named Hyun-taek Oh. He's in charge of our public diplomacy. And Jung-gun Han is responsible for our social media. And with your permission, I'm going to connect them to you. I mean, okay. Jung-gun already knows you.
Oh, but, is that the person that I got contact?
Right, but in any case, are there any other Koreans studying in Bar-Ilan?
In Bar-Ilan, it's a small proportion. As I know, there's only one female student who's studying BA program, but there's a lot studying in Hebrew University, and there's some.
Yeah, we can do a lot. We can do a lot more with this, and we will. Okay, mm-hmm. All right.
I would also be happy to get the connection with the embassy of Israel.
Totally, and I hope that Israel is really good to you, and that you're.
Yeah, I'm very enjoying
your time there.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter is a law student at Tel Aviv University. She's going to go one semester at SNU, and I hope that Korea's people aren't always. They're very nice people, and it's a great country, but they're not as warm as in Israel.
Mm.
So, anyway,
Is she the daughter who drew the?
No, that's Zoal. That's my second daughter.
I saw that picture, like the art piece. It was amazing.
Kangwoo, I'm can answer any question.
Oh, okay, thank you. So should we start the interview?
Let's start.
After I prepared like 10 questions that I wanted to ask you, and we can start right now. And after the 10 questions, we can talk more about personal things, and I would like to enjoy that. So
okay,
we start. Sure. I'll start my interview. First of all, thank you for participating to this interview and giving this opportunity for me to conduct this interview. I am very pleased to meet you. So the first question is a general question. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a short story of when and how you became the ambassador of Israel in South Korea?
My name is Akiva Tor. I live in Beit Shemesh, Israel. I'm a career diplomat in the foreign ministry. And this is my first ambassadorship, but the third time that I'm a head of mission. I will keep it really brief. I grew up in the United States as a son of a rabbi in a modern Orthodox, very Zionist home. And I grew up learning Hebrew together, the Aleph Bet together with ABC. I went to Jewish education my whole life. From an early age, I wanted to live in Israel. But I only made Aliyah formally when I graduated university. I went to Columbia. I arrived in Israel at age 24. I was in the IDF until age 27. When I was coming to the end of my army service, I was asking myself, so what will I do with my professional life? And I wanted to do something which would maximize my own personal skills, but it would also be good for the state of Israel, and also something that would keep me in Israel. In other words, I didn't want to choose a profession. I mean, it's true that in diplomacy, I served some years abroad, but I didn't want a profession like I was worried about going to becoming a historian where I would end up taking a tenured position somewhere in the Midwestern United States because I couldn't get one in Israel. Mm-hmm. So I applied for the Israel cadets course of the foreign ministry, and I got in, even though I thought the chances were not high, but it worked out. And then I began a diplomatic career. I served first in the Netherlands. Afterwards, I was head of our office in Taiwan, which is an unofficial mission. I did a number of jobs in headquarters, both as a spokesperson, dealing with Palestinian affairs. I got to spend a year at the Kennedy School on a Wexner Fellowship. Afterwards, I became very involved in the foreign ministry in our work with the Jewish world. I was director of the Jewish Communities Department. I was also the head of the president's advisor I was on loan to the president's office. And afterwards, I was consul general in San Francisco. And when I returned to the foreign ministry, I was appointed head of Bureau of World Jewish Affairs and World Religions, which is all of the foreign ministries work with the religions of the world and all of the issues having to do with our relations with the wider Jewish world. I was, when it came time to become ambassador, at this point in my career, you're not sent somewhere where you don't apply for. Mm-hmm. And I was very interested in returning to Asia and doing something which is proper diplomatic work and not only the Jewish world. I was very, very happy when I was appointed to Korea. It's a fascinating job. I'm now about 9 months into the job. I expect to be here about 4 years in total. Wow. And it's very challenging, but very, very stimulating.
Wow. Okay, thank you for your story. So the second question is about the embassy. Could you explain what an embassy is as a national institution and what's the role and mission is of the embassy?
An embassy is an official office of the State of Israel in a foreign country. There's legal questions as to whether the territory of the embassy is actually territory of the State of Israel or not. To my understanding, an embassy is protected by diplomatic protocol and treaties, but it's not sovereign Israeli territory. But we are a little island of Israel in Korea, in the sense that we're an Israeli staff. We also have very significant Korean staff who are working for us. But the dominant culture in the embassy is Hebrew and Israeli culture. And we are carrying out a work plan, which is an extension. We're a field office of the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs, although we're also representing all aspects of Israel government. And to a certain extent, we're actually representing all aspects of Israeli society. Our job as an embassy is to help bring the mutual interests of Israel and Korea into a deeper alignment. This can also be the case in all kinds of other countries, but in Korea, it's a much easier job because there actually are real interests in which we can serve each other. A lot of it is a complementarity between the Israeli and Korean economies, which in my view is not nearly tapped enough. In order for it to happen, we need a higher level of engagement at the level of senior economic leadership, but also, maybe even more importantly, at the senior political level. For example, there's never been a visit in 60 years of relations almost, there's never been a visit by a Korean president to the State of Israel. Now, it's not because the Korean government and Israeli government do not understand the importance of their relations. It's because we're human beings. Ministers, heads of government, cabinet chiefs are all human beings. And we operate on the basis of what is pressing us, what is nearest, what is most urgent, not always necessarily what is most important. And Israel and Korea are distant. They're exactly on opposite ends of the Korean continent, and of the Asian continent, I mean. And it's my job, and I think it's also the job of the Korean ambassador in Herzliya, to remind the governments that we're working with, hey, come and engage with Israel. That's my job here. I don't do it alone. I have a deputy. We have an administration, consular office. We also give consular services. We have an economic office with an economic attaché sent from the Ministry of Economic Affairs. We have a military attaché sent by the IDF, or Israeli Ministry of Defense, actually. And we work together as a collaborative team to advance the Israeli engagement with Korea for the mutual interest of both countries.
Okay, thank you. I think you also answered my third question. My third question was about like what an ambassador does actually, because the ambassador is the leader of the embassy and the representative of your country, Israel. And people mostly know that ambassadors meet many other people and talk to them as a representative, but people mainly think that this is the only thing they do. So could you explain a bit more of what an ambassador actually does and what your mainly like daily task is?
I think maybe I should do it by way of example. Last week on Wednesday and Thursday, I had a 2-day trip to Busan, Korea's second largest city. Also, it's a port city. Busan port is of huge economic importance for the world. It's the second largest transshipment port, 6th largest container port. And Zim ships, 170 to 200 Zim ships dock in Busan port per year. So it's of extreme importance for Israel and for the movement. So what did we do there? Well, the first thing on my agenda was to meet the new mayor of Busan. He was elected in April. Why is that important? It's important for me. First of all, Busan is a large city of 3.4 million people, a huge economy, but also it's of political importance. He's representative of people's power. He was elected in a landslide, and maybe it's the beginning of a political turn in Korea. In any case, a good ambassador and a good mission is building its relations with both the parties of the opposition and the parties in government. So it's very important for me to know a figure like this. And of course, in the meeting, we talked about specific things like, connecting Busan to Haifa and realizing the mayor's plan for smart green cities and industry academic partnership, which we can do with the Technion and Busan National University. So I came well prepared, knowing the mayor's agenda, and I think we had a very good meeting. Other things I did in Busan, I met the Christian leadership, the heads of the mega churches. I met about 40 people like this. I met the administration of Busan Port. We talked about their relations with Haifa Port and possibly with Ashdod Port, and whether there's even room for Busan Port investments in Israeli ports, because they do that in Rotterdam, in Barcelona, and in Java. I visited the Busan Museum of Art in order to plan how in Busan we will carry out a celebration of 60 years next year of Korea-Israel relations, and we want to do something with the museum. I had a meeting with the Busan Ilbo, which is the major newspaper of the Busan region. I met with the editor-in-chief, and also we had an interview. And then finally, I went to see the Lotte Giants play, because that's Busan's baseball team.
Yeah.
And they have incredible fans, but they lost badly.
Oh, that's sad. Oh, so I can understand that the ambassador goes to different sectors and different fields and meet the representatives in many different fields.
Yes, but it should be guided by an overall tactical and strategic vision. In other words, it's important to, as ambassador and as an embassy, we need to cast our bread on the waters. In other words, I have to be willing to meet a lot of people and do a lot of things that may not necessarily lead to something very rich. But on the other hand, there's always possibility. But on a trip like this, where I'm traveling a far way and I'm out of the office for 2 days, every meeting is important. It has to be well planned. That I don't do things that I don't think will advance our essential work plan.
Okay, thank you.
But then, for example, what we're doing right now, I think it's an example of spreading wide. I don't know exactly who you are, but I'm happy to invest in you and to invest in whoever will perhaps be seeing this interview. And actually, even in our initial conversation, I already felt, it seems to me that you might be a very good partner for future work that the embassy wants to do with Korean students in Israel.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's very, very important for them. I mean, I have many colleagues, and some of them go about the job a little bit differently than me. Some are less strategically inclined and don't work according to a strict work plan. Others, in my opinion, work a little bit too strictly according to the work plan and don't want to do things that deviate. I think you have to have a good work plan. You have to realize it and prosecute it, but you have to be willing to do many things, and it's very important to be curious, to enjoy communication.
Thank you. I personally thought that this interview is just only a good experience for me, but thank you for saying that it's also a good investment for you. So the fourth question is about the free trade agreement that was signed last May, this May. And I would like to ask you about the procedure it took to finally come to signing the free trade agreement. And I also would like to ask you the importance of FTA, because as I know, for Israel, it's the first country in East Asia to sign the free trade agreement. And for Korea, it's the first country in did I confuse?
Yeah, you got it right. It's actually even more so. The FTA was signed May 12th. It was Israel's first FTA with any Asian country, not only East Asian. It's before India, China, Japan, Vietnam, Thailand, with Korea it's the first. And indeed, it's Korea's first FTA in the Middle East. It took a long time. It was the work on the FTA began almost 7 years ago.
Wow.
It was two ambassadors before me. Ambassador Uri Gutman had the idea of the FTA and he pushed it very hard, and he found partners in Korean government and he got the ball rolling. And a lot of the credit that this happened really belongs to him. My predecessor, Chaim Choshen, also, there was a very, very long negotiation. The FTA is not a short document. It's about 130 pages long. And it's hard. Government bureaucracies, especially working at a distance, it can take a long time. And then for me, the major challenge was actually getting it signed, because we were thinking about signing online because of the problems of COVID traveling. Korean side very much wanted it to be in person. And in the end, it was in person. The FTA agreement has significance for a number of reasons. Number one, the agreement itself, it abolishes almost 95% of tariffs between us. That's actually very good for the Korean side, because Israel buys a lot of Korean goods, and now Korean goods will be probably significantly less expensive. It's a lowering of almost 7% of tax. I really hope that these savings will be passed on to the Israeli consumer and won't be swallowed by the importers. But it's also, we're also selling Israeli goods here. But the FTA also creates all kinds of instruments that are important for protecting intellectual property and for having the necessary legal, infrastructural, and bureaucratic tools that are needed for a lot of investment and moving forward. But I think even more important than that, the FTA is a very, very strong signal of the two governments saying that our two countries are interested in each other. Our economies should engage deeply with each other, and particularly in the case of the Korean side, it's the Korean government saying to all tiers of the Korean economic community, there's no zero-sum game here. You don't have to worry about the Arab boycott. We're really past that, and engage with Israel fully. This, I think, is the true meaning of the FTA.
Was Arab a big how do you say object that was bothering this free trade agreement?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. I mean, I think that when the decision was made to pursue an FTA agreement with Israel, it was, I'm sure that one of the considerations on the Korean side is what will be the downsides of such an agreement, and it was decided to move forward. So that decision was taken a couple of years ago, but this is a very public expression. By the way, we still have to go through two formal acts of ratification, one by the Assembly in Yoido, and the other by Knesset in Jerusalem. And it's my job and job of the Korean Embassy to make that happen as soon as possible so that we can enter the FTA into law in both countries.
I was in Israel. I was very surprised to see so many Hyundai and Kia cars. Like, I was very shocked there was a lot.
Korean cars are the most popular in Israel.
And I hope to see more products in Israel and more products in South Korea.
Yeah, but the trade relationship is somewhat different because the Korean economy is producing platforms. They're producing cars, phones, a lot of hardware. Israel is producing more innovation and software, which is entering into those platforms.
The technologies.
So it's a little bit tricky to exactly identify where one begins and one ends.
Okay. So we can go to the next question. The next question is about the change in Israel politics and its effect to Israel's worldwide diplomats. As we all know, in Israel, the new coalition government by Naftali Bennett and Lapid was finally formed as the Knesset approved it. Actually, after 4 trials of general election. And for Israel politics, I think this means a big change because Israel was led by Benjamin Netanyahu for more than 12 years straightforward. So I would like to ask you if you think this change in Israel's domestic politics is going to bring a change or effect in the international field, especially about the policies to South Korea and East Asia.
Okay, so I'm asked by a lot of people here, does the change in government mean that I end my term of service? And the answer is no, because in the Israeli system, almost all heads of missions are civil servants of the foreign ministry. We only, in our entire service, there are only 11 political appointments are allowed out of approximately 103 missions. So almost 90% of our serving diplomats are, or more than 90%, but almost 90% of ambassadors and heads of missions are professional diplomats. So my job is to represent and to move forward the interests of the state, whatever government we have. In the case of our relations with East Asia, I don't see that there's going to be much change. I think there'll be a tremendous amount of continuity. I don't see really differences between one government and another government in terms of the things that we want to do with Korea and the things that we want to do with the other countries here in the region. By the way, I think there'll be a continuity in a lot of things. Relations with the United States, there may be some changes in the way the Israeli government talks to or voices its opposition to the JCPOA. But by the way, government will still be opposed to the JCPOA, just like the previous government. So there'll be more continuity than maybe one would expect. Also, because the nature of the new coalition, they have to avoid very contentious points. So that means that there won't be a right-wing agenda, there won't be a left-wing agenda, there'll be very much a centrist agenda. And the previous government was also a coalition with blue and white. So I think that the changes will be primarily changes of style rather than changes in substance. There is a question regarding the foreign ministry itself because Foreign Minister Lapid came in and he said that the foreign ministry had been neglected by the Israeli government for many years. That was being corrected by previous Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi, but I think it's largely true. We've lost a lot of budget. We've lost a lot of manpower. I don't know how much will actually be replaced because the Israeli government budget is under a lot of stress and the government has said that they're not going to raise taxes. But I do think that in general, the role of the foreign ministry will become more, it will return to more of its traditional job. However, here in East Asia, the Israeli embassies were always the only branch of Israeli government really moving forward the foreign policy. So not a lot of change.
Okay.
Just like, by the way, well, actually, no, I can't say it, and I don't want to say it. If there's a change of government in Korea, how will that change relations with Israel? That's a question for the Korean ambassador, not for me.
Okay. Thank you. So we can go to the next question. It's the 6th question, and I would like to ask you of what you think of South Korea, your impression of South Korea as an Israel diplomat. Was there any similarity or difference between Israel and South Korea? Because I personally found so many similar traits, such as our history. We got independent in the same year, and similar economic development process. And we both have security issues with North Korea and Palestine, and so more. So I would like to ask you your personal opinion.
Well, I think all the points that you've raised are completely true.
Mm-hmm.
And I would even add a few more. I think both countries are aware of their ancient history, are very deeply in love with their native language,
Mm-hmm.
are aware of the economic miracle that both countries have gone through after a period of tremendous suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Although Korea's situation after the Korean War was significantly harsher
Mm-hmm.
than the situation in Israel after the War of Independence, even though Israel was impoverished in many ways. But we didn't have hunger like
Mm-hmm.
in Korea. But on the other hand, we were just a few years after the Holocaust. So both countries had a very, very tough 20th century. And we're also, the nature of our national security challenges are different,
Mm-hmm.
but they're still very significant. Neither country allows their security problems to define them. In other words, we get on with life. And I'm constantly surprised to hear how little people are talking about the DMZ or
Mm-hmm.
the challenge or the nature of the armed forces, which are on the other side of the DMZ towards the north. Just don't talk about it. It's really, it's not even thought about. It's not really impacting on people's consciousness. And Israelis too. We deal with our security things, but it doesn't keep the party from going on. So all these things are very similar. There's also a lot of differences. The character of the people is very different. By the way, both peoples also very much love their native cuisine, very much so. Koreans, I am crazy about this place. It's I think it's a country that goes into your heart. Seoul is a little bit too urban for me, a little bit too much concrete, a little bit too never ending. But the moment you get out into the mountains, which are actually very, very nearby, Gwanok and Cheonggi-san, and I live right next to Namsan, but if you go past the Blue House, and I was in Sunday in Bukhansan, you're immediately in this incredible mountainous nature, and it's really wonderful. But the Koreans are more reserved. My staff is incredibly hardworking, incredibly intelligent. I'm talking about my Korean staff. Very, 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 very disciplined and mature about work and doing high quality work. For me, they're a little bit too deferential. In other words, I prefer my Israeli staff, on the other hand, gives me hassles. They tell me exactly what they think about my ideas. And sometimes that's great. And sometimes a little bit, in general, I would like our Korean staff to be a little bit more like our Israeli staff, and our Israeli staff to be a little bit more like our Korean staff.
I think,
but the answer to your question is I'm having the time of my life here. It's first of all, being an ambassador is a lot of fun because you have access to so many parts of the country, and you're in a way a privileged person because you're an instrument of state, and it makes it incredibly interesting to be here. But also, just the country is very compelling. Its story, its energy, it's a very compelling place, and it touches me.
Oh, great to hear that. I personally think like I think I can give an example in the, I'm not sure, but in the high tech and like the IT industry, they're both very high tech country, but I think it's very different field. Israel has the creativity and can make new technology, but on the other hand, South Korea is also developed in high tech, but I think South Korea is like a good follower. Like if there's a technology, they're a good follower and good in manufacturing things. So I think.
Well, first of all, I think there's a lot to what you're saying. Although, there is, I don't think that we should undercut Korean creativity, and there is a startup community here. Doesn't have the same place as in Israel, but there's a lot of innovative thinking about the hydrogen economy, about electric vehicles, about mobility. I think that the large Korean concerns are very forward thinking and are thinking very deeply and creatively. Even if some of the innovation is coming from other places, but they're talking about it here all the time. And I think the Korean ability to produce very, very sophisticated and complicated platforms, be it a jet fighter or a stealth fighter or vehicles or the newest phones or semiconductors, to produce them well at a high level of quality, and then to market them globally throughout the world. It's a genius, which Israel doesn't have. Israel has other strengths. But this is one of the reasons why the economies are good for each other.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. Okay.
Also, both countries are very family oriented, very devoted to parents, and yet different. There are some things in Korea which make me sad. I have to say, I feel bad. I feel bad for young people. I mean, the cost of housing it makes Israel look cheap, and Israel also has a housing crisis, but an apartment in Seoul, an average apartment costs $1 million, which is not reasonable. And the Korean education system is harsh and difficult.
Yeah.
And parents worry about how their kids are going to make it through and get to a good university. And I think in Israel, parents are much more laid back about these things. I hope that Korea will become a little bit more like Israel on this, because you don't have to be in school till 10 o'clock at night. Yes, you can still educate the youth.
I also get that feeling in this university. Like, people are very different from me. And actually,
well, for good and for bad. I mean, it could be they're not doing their homework properly, and their attitude towards their education is not as serious maybe as yours. But but how in the movie The Shining, Jack Nicholson, all work and no play makes Jack mad, something like that. I don't know.
The thing I feel is that it's not about how much they work. It's like, I think we work the same, but I always have the pressure that I need to work more. So it's hard for me to get out of my room and go out and have some other time. But for Israeli friends, I feel like they're more open to having my own time and not just studying. And they finish their work and they go out and play with other friends, but they don't get the pressure that they need to study and study. But I think it's me who was born in South Korea and educated like that, who has the pressure always that I need to study and I need to do more to achieve.
That could well be. But again, we need to find a happy medium between the two.
Okay. So,
I mean, it's important that a university student do all their readings and write good papers. That's also very important.
Okay. The next question is a follow-on question, and it's about the cultural difference between Israel and Korea. We actually just said about this, but as you know, Korea is a very high context culture where people try to be careful of what they say and prefer to communicate elusively rather than directly. But on the other side, Israel is a very low context culture where people are explicit and direct in communication and always want to go to the main point in the conversation. In other words, I think this is the spirit of chutzpah in Israel. So did you actually have a chance to find this cultural difference or difficulty in conversation? And how did you manage the difference?
I'm tripping up on this all the time. Well, okay, first of all, there are quite a few parts of Korean government that I've met, and also business people that are very direct.
Oh.
And say to me exactly what they think. And so that happens too. But I agree with you that that's not, you know, what you generally run into. In other words, generally you're running into a very deep societal sort of politeness. In Israeli eyes, it looks a little bit like shyness. I see it all the time. One of the interesting things, though, in Korea is that there are not a lot of, there's very few Israelis here, and there's not a huge amount of Westerners either. So you don't really see it happening all the time. But in my engagement, I'm always like talking very directly, and I'm sure I'm making a lot of mistakes. But I think that the Korean people are also making quite a lot of allowances, and they understand when they're talking to someone from another culture, and they're the Korean. I think that Israelis are more curious about foreigners than Koreans are about foreigners. In other words, I would guess that your appearance in the Bar-Ilan cafeteria or wherever you walk is actually going to elicit a lot of contact with you. I would hope so. I hope that's the case. Here in Korea, I think Western appearance can generate avoidance. Sometimes it has to do with the problem of English. Koreans are learning a lot of English, but they struggle. They really struggle with the language. They're not the only ones, also the Japanese and the Chinese, which is, you know, causing less of an engagement, I think. There's all kinds of differences, as you and I both know.
Was there any example, like a specific situation or story?
I have to be careful not to ask too many personal questions.
Oh, okay.
I mean, in Israel, people quickly ask you how much your apartment costs and what is your salary. These questions are asked. But there's also, you know, many questions about family status and what's going on with you and what's going on with children. These are questions that we talk about in Israel a lot, and here it's much more sensitive. And I have to learn how to respect that issue of private space a little bit more.
Okay, thank you.
Israelis, like if I'm talking to my staff and I'm inquiring how things are by them, I understand myself to be caring about them, to show that I'm genuinely interested in them as people. But I think at times it can be interpreted as invasive.
Okay. The next question is, a bit sort of a personal question. I want to ask you your thoughts about your job as an ambassador and as a diplomat, and what is the pros and cons you think about your job? And if you can give an advice or a comment to people like me who want to work in the international field and as a diplomat, like I would like to learn and listen about that.
Okay, well, let me speak about the positive. I think that representing the state of Israel is a huge. It really fills you with meaning. You know, it's like I'm never going to get stage fright when I'm appearing on behalf of the state of Israel, because I feel that I'm speaking for my entire people. There's absolutely no room or place to be timid, and it brings a lot of meaning to work, and a strong sense of responsibility, and I think it's a great thing for me in the foreign ministry. On the other hand, working in government, any government office has a lot of challenges. Government is bureaucratic. Government is slower. I'm not saying that in the private world or in the NGO world there aren't office politics, but there's quite a lot of office politics in Israel Foreign Ministry, as I think in every Israeli governmental structure, and yeah, that can get you down. Working at home office is not as exciting as working abroad. On the other hand, you're at home and you're near relatives and you're in Israel, which is a very nice place to live, but you make less money than when you're abroad. And again, the work is not as exciting. You have too many bosses back at home. But by and large, I found my career choice to be pretty good so far. You know, there were better years and there were worse years, but that's the way life is, I think. Now, there's if you're going to be though in government, so there's a big difference between working in the foreign ministry and being in the political world, because we are carrying out policy. In a lot of cases, the foreign ministry is making policy on its own, because we don't receive political directives about a lot of things, and when you're in the field, you're making decisions all the time, and you're not asking for instructions all the time. You're part of the state's decision making, but you're not directing the. I mean, you know, if a person is considering a political life, running for Knesset, or like, I think it's better to be a Knesset member than it is to be a diplomat. I mean, I think to be a lawmaker and to be part of running the country, but it's very hard to be a Knesset member, and it's not for everyone. And what it takes to get there is not necessarily the same things as the qualities that you want in a Knesset member, which is, by the way, true in all politics. So the political life is very risky and has a lot of challenges, and maybe it has more moral risks than being a diplomat. But on the other hand, it's really to represent the people and to speak as an elected representative, which is something quite special. I would say whatever choice you decide to make professionally, whether it's in academia or in government in politics or in the business world, try to do something that makes a difference. Don't choose your profession according to the paycheck. Of course, you need to make enough money to raise a family and to live a decent life, but there's no need to be rich. A person needs to make the amount of money that they need. And I do believe that government service is very worthy. And both a country like Israel and a country like Korea deserve and need very high quality public servants.
Okay. Then how is your family dealing with all the like moving back and like different countries?
So, well, right now I'm in an unusual situation because I'm older now, my kids are older, and for the first time I'm actually serving without my family. Every other posting, either my kids were born during those posts or they went to school, but we were always together as a family. Now, for the first time, I have two daughters in university. I have a son in the army, and I have my daughter who just finished high school and is going to Mechina for a year, actually Midrashah, and then we'll do her army service. And my wife will only join me this coming September. So it's quite a challenge that we're separated, and we're a very close family, so it's tough. It's a good thing there's WhatsApp. My family, I think, to a large extent, thrived during my career, but I made many compromises with my professional ambitions in order for my family to do well. For example, I've been in the foreign ministry for about 33 years, and of that, a third of those years approximately have been abroad. Other diplomats, though, have served half of their years abroad, sometimes even 60, sometimes even 70%. That can be good for professional advancement, but it makes it tough for your kids to be Israelis. And my wife and I, we were careful to allow the very significant amount of years between postings so that our kids could acclimatize to Israel, regain their command of the Hebrew language and making it their first language, and have friends and really feel that their home is Israel, not somewhere else. And doing that, I mean, required me sometimes to stay longer in posts at home office, which maybe I didn't want to, or, you know, weren't always the most interesting over a long period of time, but I made that balance. Sometimes I think some of my colleagues, have not thought enough about their kids. And it can lead to a situation where there's not a small number of foreign ministry kids who are living abroad, maybe don't feel Israeli enough. But it absolutely doesn't have to be like that. Also, there were like places that I was willing to go. For example, I was happy to go to Taiwan early in my career when I didn't need Jewish education for my children. But mid-career, I made sure to serve in the United States because I wanted my kids to have a Jewish education. And now, at the end, so I can go to Korea, and it's not a problem. So,
wow, a very good process.
but my kids tell me that they were pretty happy, but it's not always like that.
Okay. And I'm also curious of how you're dealing with your Jewish life, because you're a Jewish person and you're gonna probably keep kosher and Shabbat, but like as I know, in Korea there's not that many kosher food, and we don't keep Shabbat, so it's different. And how are you like dealing with those things?
Well, all of the Israeli ambassadors here have been Jewish, but I'm the first one who's I'm the first one who's Orthodox. So I knew that there would be challenges, and I prepared for it. The kitchen in our residence is completely kosher. In other words, we have strict separation between meat and dairy, and I found sources of kosher meat, although it wasn't easy.
Wow.
Yeah. Hang on, someone's calling me on WhatsApp. I'll just turn that off a second. But so I found sources of kosher meat. I eat a lot of salmon. It's not so easy. There's a Chabad here, but we haven't had a minyan of 10. That's sort of like a Jewish house, not far from, actually 5 minutes away from me here in Itaewon.
Is it like a synagogue? It's
like a synagogue, yeah. It's like a Jewish center synagogue, but run according to a Hasidic philosophy. It's very, very interesting Chabad rabbi here, Rabbi Litzman, and he has a family of 9 children now, and
Wow.
raising them all here in Korea. Anyway, it's possible to buy kosher chicken. It's possible to buy kosher beef. Eating in restaurants is a challenge, especially in Korean traditional food. If it's not temple food, it's a real challenge. But luckily, as an ambassador, I have a kitchen staff, so I do a lot of entertaining here. Shabbat, so I try to entertain every Friday night, and I invite parliamentarians, journalists, entertainment people, business people. They all come here, and for many of them, it's the first time that they're seeing a Shabbat dinner.
Wow. Yeah. I have many friends that want to visit Korea, but I always tell them if you go there, it's gonna be hard to find kosher food. So like, it's gonna be a big challenge.
You shouldn't tell them that. You shouldn't tell them that. First of all, there's lots of vegetables in Korea. Second of all, it depends on level of kashrut observance. So if someone is extremely, extremely strict, then they're going to run into difficulties. But they'll also manage. And but someone, there's tuna fish. And there's Italian restaurants where you can get pasta, even though that's also a problem with the dishes. And there are also vegan restaurants, not many. It's not a reason not to come.
No. So I'll tell my friend to visit me.
No, don't tell them not to come.
Okay. So this is the last question. I want to ask you how your experience in South Korea was so far, and if you have any further plans.
I'm feeling that I'm only scratching the surface. I'm trying all the time to learn things in a much deeper way. I'm really interested in the entire Korean culture. My daughter took a course in Tel Aviv University in modern Korean cinema. So she told me the movies that I had to watch in order to be even barely literate. I'm reading Korean novels. I really like sport and nature, and there's a list of 100 peaks in South Korea. Unfortunately, did you know that the better mountaintops are in North Korea?
Oh yeah, like Paektusan.
They're over 3,000 meters there. But Korea's I've been down south now 3 times. And I'm going to Jeju Island in 2 weeks. But I want to go really on almost every significant mountaintop here.
Actually, in my high school,
I like the Buddhist temples also. They're cool.
Also in high school, I had the chance to go to. We have the 3 toppest mountain in South Korea. It's Hallasan and Seoraksan and Chirisan.
Jirisan?
Yeah, Chirisan in the south.
Right.
And I
haven't been on any of them yet. I've only been, the highest I've been is Bukhansan. And Baidege. But that's just north of Seoul. But I'm gonna get out. I'm going everywhere. Also, our embassy staff, before I got here, they biked from. Actually, when I got here, when I was in quarantine, they biked from Seoul to Busan. So I have to do that. There's also a whole route on the East Coast. So I've got a lot of stuff to do here.
Actually, I saw you on Twitter that you always like biking, like cycling.
It's true. I plan to go out tomorrow morning also before work.
And for me, like, it's also a big thing for me because actually, before I go to my military service, I want to do the Seoul to Busan trip with the bike. Like, it's going to take
I would
like
recommend you need to do Shvil Yisrael. You need to do the Israel National Trail.
With the bike?
Well, first of all, it's doable. It's from Metula Teilat, and it's based on hiking, but most of it is actually rideable by bike. I know because I have a friend who did it, but they've also developed some alternative trails which are biking trails. So you can do mountain bike, or you can walk it, or you can do a combination. But it's a way really to see Israel. It's something, by the way, which is lacking in Korea. Korea does not yet. And I was talking to Park Jin, who is a parliament member. About he's very concerned about these issues, about the idea of marking out a Korean national trail, which will be possible to walk all the way from the north to south on the Taibik range. You know, right now there are trails all over the place, but they don't link up to each other.
Yeah, that's right.
When I got here, one of the first things I did, I took the embassy staff on a walk around the old city wall of Seoul. Great walk. A little bit long, but it's really nice. And it's very interesting. Sweet country here.